Good morning, everyone. My name is Kaleb McClendon, and today I will be presenting my research project titled House Rules: How the NCAA settlement repackages wage caps as reform. The project examines inequality within the NIL era and asks whether the NCAA's House settlement truly expands athlete compensation or whether it just restructures and reinforcing these existing inequalities under a new system or a new institutional control. So, getting right to the intro, over the last several years, college athletics has experienced one of the largest structural shifts in the history of the NCAA. I mean, for decades, the NCAA's defended amateurism, or the term quote unquote amateurism, as the defining principle of college sports. And athletes have generated billions of dollars through television contracts, ticket sales, sponsorships, merchandise, and media attention, while the NCAA rules restricted them being directly compensated. But that model began to weaken through a series of legal and political challenges. Cases such as O'Bannon versus NCAA and NCAA versus Alston questioned whether the NCAA's restrictions on the athlete compensation violated antitrust law, and at the same time, public pressure increased as college athletics became more commercialized. So ultimately, this contributed to the rise of NIL, or name, image, and likeness rights, which allowed college athletes to begin profiting from their personal brands. However, NIL did not create an equal marketplace, and this is the key caveat. This is the exact spot where I'm exploring at. Instead, though, NIL actually introduced a highly market-driven system where visibility, media attention, sport type, and social influence shape compensation opportunities. In 2025, the proposed House versus NCAA settlement introduced another major shift. The settlement presented as a reform that expands athlete comp through revenue sharing, but also introduces new oversights, spending structures, and more control over compensation. This creates the tension of my project, like I mentioned before. The question is no longer simply whether athletes can be paid, it is who benefits most from these systems and how is compensation distributed across athlete groups. Moving on to the research question. My research specifically asked to what extent does the House settlement reinforce existing inequality in NIL compensation among college athletes? More specifically, I'm examining whether NIL value is concentrated among certain sports, genders, and high visible athletes, and whether the emerging settlement structure risks maintaining those patterns instead of redistributing opportunity more broadly. I don't have literature review on here just because it's kind of implied through everything else I'm saying, but through this presentation, I will add that in. So, existing research on NIL often focuses on athlete branding, social media influence, marketing opportunities, or legal changes surrounding compensation. Many scholars have discussed how NIL allows athletes to function more like entrepreneurs and personal brands nowadays, but at the same time, researchers have also identified concerns regarding unequal access to NIL opportunities. Revenue generating sports such as football and men's basketball, notably women's basketball too, as it's on the rise, receives substantially more media exposure and investment from their institutions in the NCAA. And so athletes in these sports often pose larger audiences, stronger recruiting profiles, and more sponsorship visibility. Besides women's basketball, female athletes and athletes in non-revenue sports maybe golf, swim, there's acrobatics and tumbling, um, those kind of sports. Track, if we're not talking about the University of Oregon track, um, they may still gain in opportunities in NIL, especially through social media engagement and community influence, but the overall compensation landscape remains uneven. So, although they may be getting, merch deals through their social media or brand deals and collabing with brands and businesses, the amount that is being paid to these athletes is farly uneven. What is still less understood about how the House settlement interacts with these pre-existing inequalities. So that gap is what this project attempts to explore, like I mentioned earlier. Okay, moving on to the methods. Study uses a quantitative exploratory approach combined with a qualitative literature review analysis. For the quantitative portion, I created a data set using NIL valuation information from ON3's NIL Top 100 rankings. The data set included variables such as athlete rank, sport, gender, athlete name, and NIL valuation. The purpose of the data set was not simply to identify who has the highest NIL value, but rather to analyze how compensation is distributed across athlete groups. On3's NIL valuation system estimates athlete market value by combining factors such as social media influence, performance visibility, brand marketability, public recognition, and roster value. After organizing the data set, I analyzed patterns across sports and genders categories to identify whether NIL value appeared concentrated among particular athlete populations. In addition to the quantitative, the literature review and policy structures showed how institutional regulation may shape future compensation systems. And moving on to what I found through those, the findings review several important patterns. First of all, NIL is highly concentrated among a relatively small group of athletes. Where's the graph? As you can see, this top 10% of athletes make 80% of revenue sharing money in NIL. 20%. Top 10% make 20% of the total NIL valuation represented in that one sample with the ON3's population. So while inequality is expected and a bit obvious, this still demonstrates a strong concentration of market value among elite athletes with high visibility. Second, football players dominated the landscape. About 90 football athletes represented the largest share of high value NIL rankings, with quarterbacks and skill positions appearing most frequently near the top. Men's basketball also maintained strong representation, while most other sports appeared far less frequent, suggesting that NIL comp is strongly tied to media exposure, school visibility, and commercial entertainment value. Third, one of the most striking findings involved gender representation. Out of the athletes included in the dataset, female athletes represented only a very small portion of the sample. Though my sample number was N equals 55, there was a list of 100 athletes on there, and 2 athletes were females. This does not necessarily mean female athletes lack influence or branding potential, but instead suggesting that high value NIL markets remain structurally concentrated around men's revenue generating sports. So the issue is not only unequal earnings, but unequal visibility within the compensation system itself. And if we go back to the literature review, we see kind of why this is, and we can go back to the history, with Title IX. This is why Title IX was implemented in the first place, is because women have gotten such less visibility and far less opportunities. So they're almost playing this sort of catch-up game. And so within the current NIL market, with men's sports already being so far ahead, it makes sense that the women's sports have not, quote-unquote, entirely caught up yet. So finally, the findings suggest that NIL markets already operate within a system of concentrated value distribution before the House settlement is fully implemented. That observation becomes really important when considering future revenue sharing structures and the institutional regulation, and we can already see that happening with the new executive order looking to be implemented this summer. Okay. There are several limitations to the study and challenges. First, the dataset relies on publicly available NIL valuation estimates rather than exact financial contract data. It's almost impossible to access real contracts, as those are confidential between the player and their agreement. Because these deals are often private, the systems, like the one I'm using, 0 and 3, provide estimates rather than fully transparent earnings information. Secondly, the project represents an early stage exploratory analysis. The House settlement hasn't even been let alone a full year, a full calendar year since the House settlement was implemented. We are, kind of seeing NIL in its first stages. I mean, starting in 2021, it's about 5 years old total, and my project specifically is the House settlement. That's not even a year old. That was signed into action this last summer of 2025, and then started with the school year in September. So the school year is not even over yet. We haven't even seen the full effects of the House settlement or what it's doing. So it's still evolving, and long-term effects on athlete compensation have not been fully materialized. Third, the data set focused primarily on high visible athletes included in major NIL rankings. Future research will expand the sample to include a broader range of athletes, schools, and conference structures, but for now, we just focused on the super high visible athletes. Additional research will also help determine how NIL inequality changes over time as settlement policies are implemented. So overall, the study suggests that NIL compensation is already highly concentrated among specific athlete groups before the full implementation of the House settlement. Football and men's basketball dominate high NIL spaces, while female athletes and non-revenue sports remain significantly underrepresented. These findings raise important questions about whether current NCAA policies or reforms truly expand the opportunity or instead formalize an already unequal compensation structure. Rather than eliminating inequality, the House settlement may recognize it within a more controlled framework. As college athletics continues transitioning toward a more professional economic system, understanding who benefits from NIL and who remains excluded will become increasingly important for policymakers, institutions, brands, and athletes themselves. Thank you guys for listening and giving me the opportunity to present my research. That is very important to me and what I'm doing with my academic and career. I'd really like to thank my mentors, Dr. Lynn Call and Keandre McAllister, as well as the McNair Scholars Program and the University of Oregon for supporting this research. I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Feel free to reach out via email or phone number. I also have my LinkedIn as a QR code down here. Thank you, guys.